This was a real side example of how we are getting through our personal created selves and all that makes up its construction. Deconstructing ourselves then, in fact, and as we do, we are confronted with all the subconscious recesses of our creation, our deep subconscious, funny aspects of ourselves that our censor tends to protect our consciousness from, that we don't see the parts of our personal selves that we would consider unsavoury, that if we do see them, will masquerade as monsters and entities, extensions of ourselves, and usually hidden from our awareness. But we must open the cage and acknowledge them if we are to release them in our process of working through the deconstruction of our simulated selves, the real side opened up in my house, which represents the personal self, and I had the viewpoint from one of these subconscious entities. The back garden tends to represent the subconscious, and this is where all the unconscious parts of our created selves will be found. As I have had real side experiences where removing of certain tap lines occurs in the back garden, or if we wish to bring something subconscious into our conscious consideration, then we take something from the back garden and into the house. Our subconscious entities, locked away as they usually are, would lurk in our gardens then, and rarely be permitted to move from there. To the individual who lacks recognition or awareness, or one that has a very strong sensor in place, they may well see their gardens as you might imagine them to be, probably a perfect replica of the delightfully maintained gardens of our physical level homes. But just like the physical world appears to the unaware eye, it is so with the recreations of our houses on the real side. We may not see the sinister, overgrown aspects of the real side subconscious, and the critters lurking in the bushes, like once how I was invited into my sister's house by her on the real side, and there was a curious window that led to her unconscious. As I investigated beyond the window, I would find a swampy, foreboding place, which caused anyone within it to transform into a monster, as we always are products of our environment. Had I lacked recognitional awareness, I may not have seen this place as it actually was, and not realized my transformation, nor recognized the real guide that removed the affliction, so that I would return safely back through the window, and not bring the taint with me. Anyway, so the subconscious entity I was viewing from was in the house. I had decided and permitted its entry from the unconscious into a conscious awareness of it, and it was a frightfully erratic and a bitter thing indeed. The guides were also present, but in the form of my older brother and my father. Again, the guides can assume the roles of those known to us, and we can recognize them, despite their guises, by the inimicable sense and presence of their real being-isness awareness, a telltale indicator that can't be faked or mimicked. And besides, I encounter my siblings and parents on the real side often, and so am used to the way they are. The difference is very comparable. So the real guides were on hand in this experience, assisting us always in our process of becoming more aware and shaking off our taplines and subconscious restrictions, only if we allow it, of course. They must be invited into our dream arenas, and in matters of this nature, as they will not violate free will, and some taplines take time to let go of, and must be the decision of the individual that they are released. So I was viewing from the perspective viewpoint of this entity then, and it was very manic in its mannerisms, screaming and wailing. It was rather embarrassing, really, to think that such things lurk in one's subconscious, and this aspect of my personal self was playing up in front of the guides. Embarrassing only to the personal self, of course, as the real self-awareness would be watching on, with its detached being-isness, objective indifference. It's almost as though this entity didn't want to be released at first, so perhaps a tricky tapline to decide to let go of, as it scuttled out into the street. The guides would follow and assure me how everything was fine, and to not concern myself about this subconscious entity's erratic behaviours, as my personal self was most ashamed at what a part of it was doing. The guides patiently followed me in my entity perspective viewpoint form along the street, and now there were other individuals there watching, even more embarrassing for my personal self. Seems I had a little trouble being objective and connecting with my real awareness in light of these happenings. My entity aspect looked like a kind of gargoyle made of straw, or a wood-like material, like a little tree ant, and it hung its head in shame amidst all the people. Interestingly, the personal self then decided in that moment that it was a bad person, and this seemed to facilitate the emergence of another individual. The instant effect of the consideration of being bad, possibly coupled with the subconscious programmed idea that bad people must receive punishment, effected then the window of opportunity for another individual to exact the punishment that such a consideration had allowed. A female entered the scene, an ill-intended character, and she would gesture to an area of grass where plants were growing. She demanded that I eat of these plants, and I may have done so in the throes of my decided upon punishment experience. Besides, what harm would plants cause? And yet, my real awareness afforded me the ability to discern poisonous plants amongst the edible ones that I would inadvertently consume should I snatch a handful of them. So I declined, and as I began to connect more with my real awareness and not my personal self, the subconscious entity I was viewing from faded away. It had been moved from the subconscious, revealed and laid bare for all to see, with the assistance of the guides. Then, after a little personal self-nonsense, it was released. With that completed, I would then find myself viewing from the perspective of my real awareness, and I was training Peter and Gwen, my parents, and my brother, the actual individuals, and not the guides this time, in how to manage and deal with entities. Interestingly, I was assisting my personal self too, from the view of my real self. The real self always knowing what to do and how to do it, and I had constructed a kind of miniature computer game that I was using like a training simulator. So another day on the real side, with subconscious clearings, the process of awareness and getting through the personal self continues, as Dwayne was saying on one of Charles' African Skypes. How, if the individual is to really get through themselves, everything that is the construction of the created self will be laid bare for all to see, and this experience would demonstrate this, as my funny little subconscious entity scuttled about in front of everybody, with no subconscious to conceal itself in. Also, we see that as we do this process, the dark forces will take their opportunities, but again, their windows of attack can only be so if they glean our agreement, taking on attitudes of self-pity or lack of worth, or ideas of being a bad person, can very much be causes that effect experiences that reflect these self-decided convictions and considerations, and we have all been programmed with the polarity of opposites through the social consciousness and the controllers, rather than simply view everything in creation as simply experience that stems from ideas created. Regardless of the experience, all are references for our personal self to relate to, and to better recognize the true reality by comparison. And so, what follows a so-called bad deed, or the knowledge of such things in the subconscious will undoubtedly have the personal self assume automatic ideas of guilt, shame, and that punishment must follow. We agree then to this potentiality and set the stage for its possibility through cause and effect, and it is instantly so on the real side. This allowed an opportunity for a dark forces person to interject, but rather than attacking, as this would still have karmic consequences for the individual, despite my agreeing to the experience, the individual tried to convince me to cause harm to myself. A cunning ploy indeed, a method expertly mastered by the Callum god, who gets other people to carry out the atrocities he wishes, that they take the karmic brunt and effects of their abrasiveness. I'm not sure what would have happened if I ate the poison plants, but like anything in creation, it's just experience for the personal self, and nothing can harm the real awareness. But perhaps eating the plants may have prevented the completion of this subconscious aspect releasing exercise, and that was the female individual's intention then, as my real self overrode the personal self and saw the plants for what they were, and with the refusal to consume them, the female faded from sight. The entity did likewise, and the subconscious aspect was released.
Terrific, Kevin. Yes, a lot of information for people, and yes, it's that and a lot more. So it is a huge journey getting through creation, and it's a good start here. So yes, thank you so much.